In an urban setting, almost every square inch that can be dedicated to green space is. And yet, we continue to find new places to look, to add a little bit of greenery, to bring those plants that will support the biodiversity that surrounds us, that will create habitat for animals and insects and everything else, and will bring joy both from the aesthetic value of a beautiful place, but also from the real benefits that humans receive from being around these sites of greenery and biodiversity. And so we're always looking for new places that we might transform into just a little bit more of an ecological paradise. And on today's show, that's exactly what we're digging into how various groups around Houston are working to think through new places that we might put new parks and new greenery and make the parks that we have just a little bit more environmentally beneficial for everyone around us and especially children. I'm Weston Twardowski, the Associate Director of Rice's Center for Environmental Studies and Associate Director of Eco Studio in the Rice Sustainability Institute, and you're listening to Gulf Streams on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM, where we talk with leading experts and community leaders to better understand the environmental problems and potential solutions facing our community. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Today, we're going to turn things over to our student researchers who have three different pieces for you. But up first, our researcher Sarah has a piece all about the ways that we're finding more greenery in our parks and creating new parks, especially for children, right here in Houston.
Hi, this is Sarah Tabrez, and today I'm sitting down to talk about Spark Parks and their impact on the Houston area. I'm joined by longtime Executive Director Kathleen Omby, along with current Director Elizabeth Howley. Today, we'll discuss how Spark Parks have transformed schoolyards into community spaces and what that impact has looked like across Houston.
Just to get started, for listeners who may not know, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Kathleen Ownby, and I have retired from Spark as of July 1st, 2025. I was the executive director of Spark for 37 years.
And for listeners who may not know, can you describe what Spark Parks are and how they began?
Sure. Spark stands for School Park, and they were started in 1983 by a city council member, Eleanor Tinsley, in order to increase park space in the city of Houston by using public school grounds.
And how did the general idea for Spark Parks first come about?
So there was a study, a green ribbon study done that was commissioned by the county judge and the mayor on how to increase park space in the city of Houston. And one idea in that commission was to use public school grounds. And so Eleanor Tinsley, who was on city council at that time, had an intern that summer, and she gave the report to the intern and said, read through this and highlight anything that you think that I should really pay attention to. And she had served on the Houston Independent School District board. And so she was very interested in HISD, Houston Independent School District policy. And so the intern highlighted that one of the suggestions was to use public school grounds. And so she did really pay attention to that and thought that this might be a really good idea of how to increase park space in the city of Houston.
And how was it decided to focus specifically on public schools as the heart of each park project?
Well, public schools are owned by the city, are owned by citizens. And so one of the big issues about expanding park space is always the cost of buying land. And when the citizens already own the public school land, then this was they didn't have to have that cost of buying the land. And then public schools, especially elementary schools, are usually in the heart of every community. And so the location was perfect to expand park space in the city.
Kind of tying back to something I asked about previously, a lot of what I study, because I'm an environmental science major, is sort of disparities in like accessibility to green spaces. So, are there any barriers to breaking into, more like underdeserved communities when it comes to Spark Parks?
Well, when you look at a map, we have 167 Spark Parks, throughout the county. And so in 18 school districts. And so we really have spread out, all over the county,
Mm-hmm.
and so um, in some cases it is dependent on funding. And so our at one time, our major funding was community development block grant funds. And if we do not find another Spark Park or another city or county park, then we can use that funding to create a Spark Park at that school.
Mm. Right.
So, so, a lot of it is dependent on the funding that we have and we can use.
Mm. Are there any like environmental or climate considerations that go into Spark Park designs?
Well, we partner with Trees for Houston, and so they will we since we're using landscape architects, it's important that we have always felt like it's important to plant trees as part of our overall plan for a Spark Park. And not all of them live. We plant 15-gallon trees, so we don't plant little tiny,
Yeah.
sticks that really would just get mowed over, by students, especially at elementary schools. So we plant 15-gallon trees. They're staked and they're mulched. It really depends on the time of year that they're planted. And they're planted by volunteers. Trees for Houston handles the planting for us. And so we try to plant them like October, November, December, so that they get a good start before we might have a really hot summer
Yeah.
where there's no rain or hurricanes or whatever. And so, anyway, so I would say trees would be our the most environmental thing that we do for a Spark Park.
And this is kind of pivoting to how like you've been executive director for like over 30 years. Whenever like you're doing a project with like very unique creative elements, is there like a specific artist that you have to reach out to, or like is there like a special process to reach out to like a different artist for that?
Um, well, we have probably 5 or 6 artists that are real popular that work well with students, and some of them speak Spanish. So when we have schools that have Hispanic culture, um, I will pick a couple of them to work with the schools, because, and anyway, we have our favorites that, work really well. And sometimes it's the art teacher that wants to do the projects, or sometimes the art teachers, need help. And so we'll bring in and pay an artist to, work with them. And so, but we have, I would say, a total of 10 artists, local artists in Houston that you'll see in our calendars a lot that um, do our projects.
That must be such a dream to work on. Like if you're an artist, like this is because you can see the impact like right away when you're working like
Yeah.
a landscaper. It's like you can see the students like running around playing with like the art that you developed.
I'm now sitting down with Elizabeth Howie to discuss her new role as executive director and what she plans for this initiative.
For our listeners or viewers, can you introduce yourself and kind of talk a little bit about how you got involved in the Sparks program?
Sure. So my name is Elizabeth Howley, and I'm the new executive director of Spark School Park Program. And I am following Kathleen Ownby, and she retired June 30th, and she led Spark for 37 years.
So I know from Kathleen that you well, she was telling me like originally like that she stepped down as director, but that like you had taken over, but you'd already been her assistant for like 6 years. So how was that experience working with her?
So Spark is a member of Earthshare, and that's how I got to know Kathleen. And then when her assistant director was retiring, um, she asked me if I would be interested in the position. And I told her, I was and interviewed for the job and then started on a part-time basis. And then it kind of kept growing from there. We're a small shop. And so when Kathleen retired, and I became the executive director.
So like now that you are executive director and kind of like drawing back to like your background in environmental science, do you like have any like kind of new strategic like sort of initiatives that you plan to like launch or like lead that weren't part of Spark's like previous kind of orientation?
So ideally, I have this vision in my head of Spark Parks being, these fabulous little parks where, the children are able to be exposed to nature and, there are opportunities for, like you had listed, for gardens, for trees, for shade, for great play value, for art, for you know, but having to scale that back a little bit, and the reality on the ground is that the we're really beholden to the school districts and how the school districts maintain the parks and what they want in their Spark Parks. And it's funny, recently we had a Spark Park dedication, but one of the things that happened there is in mid-October, Trees for Houston had scheduled a tree planting day with ExxonMobil volunteers. And so they came out and there was 20, 25 volunteers and they were planting trees in the park. And the trees, they start out like 15-gallon trees. But the Trees for Houston has a plan where they will come out for a 2-year period and water the trees. And so they start out with little, stakes in the ground and little ties to make sure that when they grow, grow straight. But what's amazing is you see today when those trees go in and you think, oh wow, they're puny. They look so tiny. How long is it going to take for them to grow? But then you go to some other spark parks where, you know, they were first sparked in uh I don't know, I'm thinking of McGowan, which is in the northeast side of Houston. And those trees were planted when it was first sparked back in probably the early 2000s. And those trees are big, gorgeous oak trees now, and they provide so much shade. And even the trees that, like, we had a tree planting there when we resparked the park back in 2019, and just a 6-year period of time, and they are already providing shade, which is great. But other uh, aspects, environmental or nature aspects. One thing that you mentioned in your questions, gardens and pocket prairies. One of the things that we found is those are fantastic, and what they really require is someone on site, a teacher or a building services manager, somebody that's going to be a champion for either maintaining, like especially with gardens, maintaining the gardens and with pocket prairies also, you know, maintaining and allowing that space to be kind of separated. Yeah.
But you mentioned like pocket prairies. Like one environmental feature is like the fact that of course there is so many drainage concerns, right? Because like it
Yes.
has like intense hurricanes, intense flooding. So like are there any sort of like I guess other like environmental features you have to prioritize when thinking about planning how to like structure a park?
Absolutely. So, on school campuses, they are required to have detention. And it's basically like what they do is they fence off, it's not a swimming pool, but
Right.
like a basin that is usually like will need to be mowed or something like that. But the purpose of it is to hold water for a time period so that the structure won't flood and like would help retain water and allow for the permeability of the soil, over to be a slower water absorption from extreme rain events, that kind of thing. And so, some thought is, how can we utilize that space? Because I mean, there's so many days when we don't need that. And so there are some campuses where the detention, the area that is like sunken and can potentially hold water, like can be used for like soccer fields or yeah, or can have other purposes. Another idea is to have like wetland type plants in any type of a basin that's going to hold water. And have the tricky thing though is there are regulations about for children's safety. Like you don't want to have any type of like a water situation where perhaps an unsupervised child is going to end up in an unsafe uh, area of the
Right.
campus, like where, yeah, and being exposed to water or something like that.
Mm-hmm. So this is kind of like it's not like totally pivoting, but so one thing that I touched on with Kathleen was how I really like kind of resonate with the fact that Spark Parks works really hard to serve like under-resourced neighborhoods,
Yeah.
communities, etc. So in what ways, like given like that, for instance, like there's issues with like drainage and like other like ecologic environmental like facets that you have to like think about already in communities that are well resourced. Are there like kind of barriers whenever you guys are like serving these under-resourced communities, like developing these parks, like I'm sure budget constraints are usually the first thing, but like any other like challenges that like typically someone wouldn't think of that you guys have to deal with?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, one of the things, I mean, that you touch on when it comes to Spark and different areas of town and different um, schools, like and the resources, we really notice a difference between the schools that have PTOs and the
Mm,
schools that do not have PTOs. And so typically what you'll see is in a school where they were in an economically challenged, area of town, where a lot of the parents are either uh, from immigrant communities or the parents are working so hard and can be working multiple jobs. And so, it's very difficult to have a situation where you have like a PTO, because a PTO requires um, parents, mothers, fathers, grandparents, guardians, whomever, to be able to volunteer and able to help fundraise for not only for the school, but also, that they love working with Spark and the Spark Parks. So when you don't have that, it uh, it does present challenges because it presents challenges from the standpoint of I call it, activating the park, getting people into the park after after it's completed and we've had the dedication and just getting people into the park to use it. So I think that's one issue. Ecologically, I would say, I definitely notice uh, discrepancies. When there are nonprofit organizations that, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. Port Houston Elementary, they do have a PTO. But I would say it's in an under-resourced area. And they've got a great Spark Park, and they have a partnership with Urban Harvest, which is another nonprofit that is focused on gardening and uh, I guess that's, like food accessibility from the standpoint of like, growing your own food kind of thing. And so they're working there and they have garden beds there, and doing a great job, but it requires work and it requires consistent effort. So you really need to have either a PTO or parents or teachers that are, like I said before, like I call them champions, people
Yeah.
that are really interested in being consistently involved in whatever project it is at a particular Spark Park.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I know like definitely like because fundraising at each individual school is like a large foundation regarding like how to like funding these parks. And this is kind of like talking a little bit like just like it's like a more hopeful question, but like if things like budget or staff constraints were completely out of the picture, do you have like any like kind of pilot projects or just like any initiatives that you'd be considering like testing like maybe like new approaches to like the parks?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that I'm very interested in is trying to uh, continue what we're already doing, but also incorporate more nature-based play, nature elements. Like there's all kinds of things that come to mind. I mean, like we talked earlier about gardens or pocket prairies or, pollinator gardens or something like that. One of the things that school districts have really vast quantities of land. And I think how we manage that land, we could reduce emissions.
Mhm.
We could have better carbon sinks on those properties. I think we could. I really think that there's a lot of opportunity, especially environmentally. We also, we work with different nonprofits. I've had conversations with Houston Audubon. They have some school programs that they do. Have had some conversations with National Wildlife Federation. They have their Monarch Heroes program where they work with schools to develop uh, gardens, pollinator gardens, and help teach children about the life cycle of the monarch butterfly. So definitely want to work with them to have some opportunities for, like we were talking about earlier, the pollinator gardens.
I've never like seen like in all my years living in Canada, living in Houston, like parks that actually have like such a very unique, creative kind of like vision in the sense that like for example, like the Mandarin school, like the inscriptions in like the playground and
Yeah.
like the like actual like the colors, everything is very, very like aesthetically sound, but also like it's very like relevant to the school.
I'm glad you brought that one up in particular. There are a lot of elements in that park that are sustainability related.
Hmm.
And so in phase two of that Spark Park, which is the one that's like really at the corner of Yorktown and West Alabama, the we got a large grant from the Green Mountain Energy Sun Club. And what the grant funded was a permeable walking trail. So it's called Raincrete, and it's similar to concrete, but it's permeable, meaning that the water can, it's porous and the water just goes straight through it. So that's the walking path. And then there's a workstation that's called a solar zone, and it's a picnic table with a shade structure, and on top of the shade structure are solar panels. And so those provide energy to you can charge your phone, but there are also plugs that you can, like if you're working outside, you can plug in your laptop or something like that. There's
Oh.
another thing that's called a power stack, and it's about how tall is it? Like 8 to 10 feet tall, and it's imagine like it's larger than a 4x4, but imagine like 6 inches by 6 inches, and it's got like solar panels wrapped around the top of it, and then kind of like I guess about waist high. It's got like these four little platforms that come out from each side for people to be able to charge their phones while they're at the park.
But then also kind of like similar question, but have there ever been kind of like local or state environmental policies or policies in general that either like aligned or helped with Sparks mission or maybe kind of served as a barrier or a challenge for the parks?
Yeah, well, let's see. I think the thing that comes to my mind when I think about challenges is the permitting requirements. So, like shade structures frequently require permitting because they are considered impermeable surface. And another thing is, depending on like what you want to put in a park, like let's say you want to put in a basketball court or something like that, that is an impermeable surface. And so that then requires permitting. So what that does is, I mean, it's important to have permitting
Hmm.
to comply with city ordinances, but what it does sometimes in our case is slow the project down
Yeah.
and a lot of times add to, the cost
Mm.
because of this the slowing the time frame, but the cost of you need to like have somebody, and a lot of times it's a landscape architect that kind of shepherd it through the permitting process. Nationally, there has been a bill introduced to kind of mandate green schoolyards. And yeah, the concern that I have with that is that when you mandate something like that, in some respects you can take away the excitement of
Oh, yes.
like if you make it something that you have to do versus something that people band together because they want to do, I
Mhm.
just, a part of me gets concerned that like, it takes the fun out of it a little bit. So our agreement with these school districts that we operate in is that they we put in the capital improvement, and then they are responsible for the maintenance of
Mhm.
it. And with what's happening in really the state of public education in the state of Texas, and the fact that public schools are, it's very difficult right now. They are losing enrollment And like with HISD, and they're navigating through the state takeover and everything. And they did not get their bond passed last November. And with losing enrollment, that means that they're in a really tight budget crunch. And so they are not doing a very good job of keeping up with the maintenance on these Spark Parks. And so it presents an issue, a problem. So we're working hard to try and figure out solutions uh, to address this because you need to have you need to have consistent maintenance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or like you might need to have to like respark like every much more often than yeah. And then finally, where as like new director, where do you see Spark Parks heading in the next decade, especially in the face of things like climate change, urbanization, etc.?
Yeah, no. So I think with one of the things that, unfortunately we're seeing with demographic shifts and with budget constraints, there will be some school closures and so it's making sure that again, we are working well with, and have very strong and good relationships with the school districts in addition to the individual schools. One thing that I really want to do well is to monitor the Spark Parks and to hold the school districts accountable, uh, which is a challenge for the maintenance of the Spark Parks. And like you had mentioned, maybe resparking a park perhaps more frequently than.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a really great rest of your day.
Well, thank you. You too. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Over to our researcher, Antara, who has a piece all about what happens after death and the way that people are thinking through new, more ecological approaches to burial, including an example right here in town.
Hi, this is Antara Verma, and today we're sitting down with Elisa Donovan, Vice President of the Coastal Prairie Conservancy, and Bethany Fauché, Project Manager for the Nature's Burial, the Conservancy's Green Burial Initiative, to discuss what green burial is, how it works, and its importance to coastal restoration. Hey guys, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Just to kind of get us started, what is a natural burial, and how is that different from a conservation burial?
So we usually say green burial and a conservation burial. So a green burial involves being interred naturally without any chemicals, embalming products. Everything's biodegradable. So the casket, for example, might be unfinished wood or seagrass, or it might even be a simple shroud. Conservation burial is everything involved in a green burial, but also improving the landscape effectively. So there's fewer plots per acre. It's lower density. We're actually certified by the Green Burial Council as a conservation cemetery, so they have some standards for that. As part of it, we are affiliated with the Coastal Prairie Conservancy, which is a land trust that is, its mission is to conserve the coastal prairie, wetlands, farms, and ranches in Southeast Texas. And so as a land trust, they are charged with ensuring that the biodiversity is maintained, that our conservation cemetery actually benefits the landscape and the ecosystem. It's just the highest standard for burial to benefit the environment.
So when did this initiative first start or really take off?
We opened in 2024, so we just passed our 1-year anniversary of being platted as a cemetery with Waller County. The initiative itself had been in the works for a number of years before that, just to make sure we had the right spot, that we had, investigated all aspects of this. The Coastal Prairie Conservancy, we are not, a cemetery organization. And so the idea of a conservation cemetery, it took a little, thinking about, but we realized that this was 100% compatible with our mission, with every plot that's sold. We actually restore that land. We're planting native seeds. So there's grasses and wildflowers that are, being added to our preserve as a result of this. And so here we are.
Could you talk a little bit more about the specific practices or restrictions that make the burial process green?
Sure. One way we explain natural or green burial to people is it is just burial. It's the simplistic burial at its core. It's what our ancestors did. It's what our great grandparents did. It's a simple burial. You could be wrapped in anything biodegradable. We've had decedents who are wrapped in a quilt, a cotton quilt, a cotton shroud, linen, pine boxes. There's even caskets made out of pressed fiber, essentially a really strong cardboard. Obviously, that's going to biodegrade really quickly. Bamboo, woven willow. There's many creative, beautiful, natural materials that are an option, and they can also be very affordable. And then, of course, as a conservation cemetery, we have, ecological management practices. We're restoring prairie. We're rewilding that area. Volunteers can get involved with that effort. We have a native plant nursery. We have bird watchers who go out and do bird counts. We just had researchers out today with the Houston Museum of Natural Science looking for a rare species of skunk on the property. So there's all sorts of exciting conservation measures that are happening along with the natural burial process.
Could you tell me a little bit more about the burial site itself, Blazing Star Prairie, in terms of its history, its location, its size, that sort of thing?
Historically, it was native tallgrass prairie with prairie potholes, which are little depressional wetlands, and it was, full of birds, butterflies, and all the creatures that rely on the coastal prairie. Over time, it was farmed as often rice farms back a number of years ago, but more recently, it was used as cattle pasture. And this particular area, it was, it's pretty flat. It's very flat. And there were sort of degraded vegetations, just grassy. There wasn't too much going on there. Through this restoration, we actually excavated the wetlands using historical maps. We could see where the wetlands used to be before everything was land leveled for farming. And we've put those wetlands back. And then we have been undergoing a process of prairie restoration, which involved 2 cover crops. So first you plant some things that will restore nitrogen fixing things like the sweet peas and other plants that will help the soil regain its health. We did a second cover crop. And then just this fall, we planted the native seed mix.
I'm excited to see what this looks like in 10, 15 years. I feel like it's going to be beautiful with some compound interest from time. But also just kind of considering this is a funerary site, is it still possible to hold services and memorials and religious ceremonies in the same way you would as a cemetery? Or is it like you're trampling on this wildlife to get there?
Good question. We certainly hold, traditional services or very unique creative services. We, for example, next Saturday we have the Honor Guard coming out to honor a veteran who was laid to rest recently. And so for a memorial service or a burial service, we mow a temporary path through the prairie to that exact burial plot. And there are no headstones because it's a natural cemetery. So we use a combination of GPS coordinates that walk us to the grave using Google Map technology. And then we have metal detectors that allow us to also find survey markers that mark all the plots.
Beautiful. And I understand that it's very new. You guys are only a year old. So I was curious, where do you envision this kind of initiative being in the next 10, 15 years?
I love that question because we have big dreams.
Go big or go home in Texas.
That's right. That's right. So this particular site, we started with just under 8 acres, and we can expand that to have, we hope to sell out our first 8 acres, within several years, and then we can go ahead and expand into the larger 50-something acres that would be available as well. And then certainly we would love to find other places in Texas where people are interested in natural burial and conservation. So thinking about other potential sites is something that we do dream about. The death care industry, as it's known, is a $26 billion industry in the United States. And my dream is that we take 1% of that and we use it for conservation. And so, instead of people using, a conventional burial can be very expensive once you have the costs of the marker, the grave liner, these expensive caskets. Like there's just it's a really costly endeavor for families. So by choosing a natural burial option, it's actually much more affordable for a family, but it does also generate resources that can be used for conservation. So if we can just take a little piece of that $26 billion industry and turn it into more conservation in Texas and the United States, it's a win for everyone.
And then this is more kind of my personal curiosity than anything, but considering that working in the end of life space comes with its own challenges, and in the conservation space, especially, it's been tense recently. What for you is the most fulfilling part about your job and the work you do for Nature's Burial and the Coastal Prairie Conservancy at large?
Good question. It's certainly very meaningful and fulfilling work to help families at a time when they're grieving, experiencing a loss, and to turn that into something that there's positive aspects to. I mean, as I did work as a funeral director and apprenticed at a funeral home in Houston, and there was lots of sadness. And it's been a very different experience to get to manage our conservation cemetery, because we see a lot of joy and peace and appreciation from the family members to have this experience for their loved one and for themselves, so they can feel like they're doing something good and honoring their loved one's wish and helping to create a new beautiful habitat here in the Houston area.
That's beautiful.
For me, it's a passion to, what sort of legacy are we leaving behind on this earth? And, do we want to leave things better than we found them? Can we preserve these wild places so that we keep, Texas, the wild place that it should be?
And maybe just as a final thing, how can people that are interested in Nature's Burial or in green burial and the work you do, where can they find more information?
Yeah, good question. Our website is naturesburial.org, and our nonprofit organization, coastalprairieconservancy.org. So either website, you can find us and find lots of good information. We'd love to hear from more people.
All right, that's all I have, but thank you guys so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Finally, our researcher Numan has a piece all about green tech experiments that didn't go quite according to plan.
As technologies like artificial intelligence continue to rapidly develop, it's important to ensure green technologies exist when possible. However, not every so-called green invention will always be successful. In the early 2000s, people were captivated by the ideas of algae-based biofuels and solar roadways, which both promised to revolutionize how we produce energy and free us from fossil fuels. Both of these ideas attracted millions of dollars in funding. Yet in the present year, neither has lived up to the hype they initially presented. So what happened? At the height of what one writer dubbed the Great Algae Biofuel Bubble, venture capitalists poured millions of dollars into companies promising to turn organisms into gasoline. In 2009, boosters predicted that algae biofuel capacity would reach 1 billion gallons by 2014. Enthusiasm stemmed from the algae's theoretical advantages, as certain strains can produce up to 40% of their mass as lipids that can be converted into biodiesel, and algae can grow on non-arable land while absorbing carbon dioxide. Major oil companies like ExxonMobil partnered with biotech firms to explore the technology further. The U.S. Department of Energy even funded research and demonstration projects. However, the reality of algae biofuels proved to be less than the expectations of the fuel. Over a decade later, essentially 0 gallons of algae-derived fuel were produced at prices competitive with petroleum. Large-scale algae farming turned out to be expensive and technically challenging. High capital costs for ponds or bioreactors, energy-intensive harvesting and drying, and the organism's sensitivity to contamination and light made commercial production unviable. As a Canary Media analysis notes, algae farming has never been shown to be economically viable for transportation fuels, and numerous algae biofuel companies either went bankrupt or pivoted to higher value products like cosmetics. Even ExxonMobil, after spending about $100 million on an algae venture, pulled back in 2013 when then CEO Rex Tillerson admitted that commercial viability was decades away. The fundamental challenge is energy balance. Algae need sunlight, water, and nutrients to grow, and harvesting the tiny organisms requires a lot of energy. When you factor in capital expenditures, water availability, and the work required to grow, collect, and process the algae, the output falls far short of what would be needed for commercial fuel production. As one critic pointed out, putting conventional 22% efficient solar panels on the same land would generate more energy as electricity than algae could produce as biodiesel. The promise of algae as sustainable fuel still remains tantalizing, but for now is relegated to the realm of research and niche products. Around the same time, another idea captured the public imagination: solar roadways, which were pavement embedded with photovoltaic panels that could generate electricity while you drive. The concept promised to transform existing infrastructure into vast solar farms and even melt snow and light the road with built-in LEDs. The French Wattway project opened in 2016 with a 1-kilometer stretch of reinforced solar panels and a price tag of over €5 million. It was expected to produce over 700 kilowatt hours of electricity per day, but in its first year, it generated roughly over 400 kilowatt hours of electricity per day, about half of the projected output. At €17 per kilowatt hour, the cost of energy from the panels was about 13 times higher than rooftop solar. In the US, the company Solar Roadways raised millions through crowdfunding and received grants from the US Department of Transportation and General Electric. A 2016 demonstration in Sandpoint, Ohio, used 30 solar road panels with integrated LEDs and a heating system. At the ribbon cutting, however, many panels failed to operate, and reports found that the panels consumed up to 1/3 of their own generated electricity to power the lights, with the heating elements potentially using all of it. Safety and durability concerns remained, and researchers at the Federal Highway Administration noted that replacing asphalt with glass-encased solar panels raises traction and durability issues. As of today, no solar roadway has been proven to withstand heavy traffic while generating cost-effective power. A 2020 analysis on Environment.co concluded that solar roadways are inefficient, lack durability, and are prohibitively expensive. Roads are flat and not angled towards the sun, reducing the panel's ability to capture light. The panels are subject to constant impact, dirt, and weather, which obscures sunlight and requires frequent repairs. Durable materials that can support vehicles while collecting energy don't yet exist, and the first Wattway section was reportedly rendered unusable within just 2 years. A US project cost more than $6 million and was declared inoperable shortly after installation. Without major breakthroughs, solar roadways remain an intriguing but impractical idea. We can see some common themes emerging from these stories. Firstly, both technologies attracted media attention and investment based on theoretical benefits, but scaling from laboratory prototypes to commercial deployment revealed their hidden costs and engineering challenges. Secondly, the costs of both technologies couldn't compete with the benefits. Renewable energy must compete on cost. Algae biofuels couldn't match the price of fossil fuels or other biofuels due to high capital and operating costs. Similarly, solar roadways produce very expensive electricity compared with conventional solar. Lastly, both had relevant engineering challenges. Algae needed sunlight, water, and nutrients, and roads shade them. Solar panels work best when angled towards the sun and kept clean, but roads are flat, dirty, and subject to constant wear and tear. Although these technologies have not yet worked or become commonplace yet, these so-called dead tech stories don't mean that we should stop innovating. Instead, they remind us to approach new ideas with a healthy skepticism, to test them rigorously, and to invest in solutions that have the highest chance of reducing emissions at scale. Solar and wind power, energy storage, and electrification are rapidly improving and becoming cheaper.
Algae and solar roadways may yet play a role in niche applications or broader applications in the future, but for now, we might be better off investing in technologies that have already proven their worth.
That's our show for this week. If you have questions or ideas for what you'd like featured on Gulf Streams, leave a voicemail at 713-348-4081. That's 713-348-4081, or email me at westont@rice.edu. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Gulf Streams is a co-production of KPFT Houston and Rice's Center for Environmental Studies and the Rice Sustainability Institute's Eco Studio. Produced by Weston Twardowski. Original music by Carter Dean. Research support provided by Sarah Tabrez, Naman Rinsdorf, and Antar Varma. Stay tuned for No Expectations with Marcus French here on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM.